All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Mastering Transformation, Insights from Autism Queensland Success. Today, I am joined with two amazing people. The first one is David Johnston, GM of Innovation and Growth at Autism Queensland, and a living proof that transformation can happen and can be successful. So certainly waiting and can't wait to hear some feedbacks on how it worked. And we've also joined by Simon Mort, who's our Director at VISEO of Solution Architecture. Simon has been heavily involved in that project. And like every good project, it takes two things to be successful: great business leadership and obviously great technical leadership. So we've got both sides of the spectrum today. Thank you so much for joining us, David and Simon. My name is Vincent Motte. I'm the VP VISEO Australia. Worked at the end user for a number of years, roughly 10 years. I've worked in the ERP space and I've worked in the Salesforce space for now over 10 years. So I've seen a bit of everything, some great projects, some not so great projects, but let's focus on the positive today. David, we might start with you. I wouldn't mind if you could introduce yourself as a starting point.
Yeah, good morning, Vincent. Good morning, everyone. David Johnston. I'm GM Innovation and Growth at AQ. I've been at AQ about just under 3 years, 2 years and 8 months, about there now. Prior to that, I had sort of 14-year career in banking. So over in banking, I was a project manager in the IT space, and then I became a process improvement and robotic process automation practitioner in the bank before moving to the not-for-profit space after the sort of 2020, the end of 2020.
Thank you. And Simon, you're on the line as well. Would you mind introducing yourself as well?
Yeah, thanks, Vincent. Good morning, everyone. My name's Simon Mort. I'm Director of Solution Architecture at VISEO Australia. I've been in IT for over 20 years. Funnily enough, also started in banking, just like DJ. So I've worked across a diverse range of technologies from Microsoft infrastructure through to Genesis telephony, and now I'm working in the Salesforce space as a solution architect. I've been working with the Autism Queensland team for a 3-year period now, from the initial design right through to delivery and ongoing support and improvement in the role of solution architect for them.
Thank you, Simon. Just a little bit of housekeeping. There is a Q&A function in the webinar, and we will have time at the end of that webinar to answer a lot of the questions. So if you want to know more about what it takes to be successful at doing a large transformation project, David and Simon will be able to answer a few questions. So please drop your questions at any time in the Q&A section. However, we will answer them towards the end. So thank you for both of you. I'm going to hide the content for now. Give me 1 second so we can see you. All right, that should be a little bit better. So thank you, David and Simon, for taking the time this morning again. We're here to talk about Autism Queensland and the 3-year journey that you went on. Quite an amazing success and quite an inspiring organization, David. Could you please introduce us a little bit to Autism Queensland? What is the mission of that organization, and what made you so passionate about that transformation project as a starting point?
Yeah, sure. Look, so I guess that the purpose of AQ really, it's enriching lives, strengthening communities by empowering autistic people to reach their potential. So, practically, what does that mean? In Queensland, we're the peak body for autism services. So we have agreement with the Queensland government, to be sort of the first call for help and introduce other services as well as our own. As a service delivery organisation, that space, we're quite a lot of things as long as they align to that purpose. So we're a school, specialised school. We're a therapy services business, both group and individual. We're an employment services business. We're a disability support business and even a consulting business, both through sort of government-funded programs and also our own consulting staff around neurodiversity inclusion. The organisation's been around 68 years. Still, main campus is in Brisbane around it's Sunnybank, but also another school campus at Brighton, the Gold Coast office that I'm in today, and all over the state, Mackay, Cairns, Rockhampton, Gladstone, and Sunshine Coast School campus opening in January, which we're really excited about.
Okay. And so, Simon, you're here as well. Thank you. When you come across an organization that is starting a big project like this one, there must be lots of thoughts going through your mind in terms of how we're going to be able to set it up for success. Where do you start, Simon, when you see an organization going through a 3-year program from an architecture perspective, and especially from a Salesforce perspective? What are the main thoughts that come to your mind as a starting point?
No, that's definitely a good question. And starting a design for any project at all can be a daunting task. But with the prospect of revolutionizing the ways of working for an organization like Autism Queensland, it's also very exciting. Personally, I find the best way to architect a solution of this scale is to start with the foundations. Any solution that's built on a strong foundation is bound to succeed. And then you combine that with an understanding of how the Salesforce platform works and what components Salesforce can provide you that will be used to ensure the right outcome. So once you've got the right foundations and know which Salesforce solutions you can use, that's when the magic starts to happen. You can then focus on identifying areas where users will be using the system the most and where processes will need to happen in bulk to ensure that the right solution is put in place to ensure scalability and flexibility whilst maintaining system integrity. Now, of course, this all takes time and a lot of workshops, so a client does need to be prepared to ensure the right people are available throughout the design phase to ensure that we get those right foundations and we get the right information to build a good solution for them.
So the right information means understanding pain points. So I'm interested to understand, David, from your perspective. You arrived in this organization, 3 years ago or 2.5 years ago. What were the main pain points of Autism Queensland, and what did it look like when you arrived there?
Yeah, look, there was quite a lot. I think probably one thing that sort of sticks in my mind sort of when I started, the answer was almost always no. When someone would come to us and say, we've got this new program, or we've won this new program for the state government or federal government, or, for this client, can we make a change to our CRM to capture these fields or to create this report or to, deliver this workflow? And the answer was always no. It was a legacy system. It was not user configurable. It wasn't customizable at all. And honestly, even in-house, we had very few skills in sort of managing and maintaining that system. We had no external access, so it wasn't a cloud-native system. Remote access to it was challenging, particularly secure remote access. So from a service delivery perspective, kind of the systems we had in place, and particularly the system we were using as CRM, really had some limitations that were handbrakes to the organisation. There were other sort of flow-on effects from that, I'd suggest. Like, we could never really get a good handle on, which clients we were doing work for. We could never get a good handle on the work that our staff were doing, who were doing services for. There was a lot of manual work to do things like invoicing and even, capturing incidents. That was, again, very manually and poorly used because we couldn't access those tools, remotely, let alone on a phone. We've got a fair portion of our staff that do just interact with our systems, in a mobile world, and we couldn't support that at all. There's just a few, Vincent. If there was any other pain points, we probably had them too.
And how do you think, and I'm interested to understand that, because Autism Queensland obviously decided to go on a major transformation. Not every organization is capable of doing that. Not every organization is thinking about it either. So how did those pain points translate into, we need to do something quite different and we need to do it in a big project with multiple steps and we're going to be resilient over a number of years to get it done? How did it translate from pain points to let's just do it?
Sorry, you cut out the start there. That was for me, that question.
Okay.
Because no, it's okay. I heard the question. I just wanted to make sure it was me answering, not Simon. because technically Simon was on this project before me. So, look, as you know, like I wasn't there at the start. So, but it definitely took some, courageous leadership, by the executives and the board, and the senior managers at AQ to embark on that journey, to have faith that, if we stayed the course over that length of time, we could, make a really meaningful change to the way the business worked. I think, certainly the makeup of the board and the makeup of the executive team helped. I think we were lucky to have some good external advisors early on in that journey, and then VISEO as a partner very early in that journey as well. That probably did bring a bit of the practical, how we could actually deliver this, and it helped us tell the story about, what would be possible, with these systems and tools, for AQ and its clients. So all of that was important in setting the scene. And then as far as embarking on the journey, that really just took courage.
Courage, I like that. I like that word. And Simon, I'm keen to have your point of view. Obviously, the project started 2.5 years ago or 3 years ago. You need to build a pretty strong team to deliver such a complex project, a team that's got vision, a team that's got, again, resilience. Can you tell us a little bit more about, what was the team structure and what sort of skill set did it take to start that project and deliver the project?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, preparing yourself to tackle such a large program of work does take a diverse team, and you do need to select the right people for the job. So with Autism Queensland, we actually had a range of staff with a lot of different backgrounds, just not a lot of people with all the same things. And these people had skills not just in not-for-profit services, but also people skilled in finance, customer service, sales, so a range of skills there. And on top of that, you also had to choose a team that had great process mapping, business analysis, and of course, Salesforce configuration capabilities. But most importantly, everyone had a can-do attitude, which really led to success. Layered on top of that, we had some really great, strong project management skills, and of course, my architectural guidance to ensure the team what they were doing, knew what they were doing, and when they were going to be doing it. So that's how we built the team and made sure that we delivered the outcomes that we needed for Autism Queensland.
And can you tell us a little bit more about like specific roles, like, solution architect, functional? What was the split roughly between, senior versus more junior people on the delivery team?
Yeah, so we did have a diverse range. We had a senior project manager, Mark, who's probably one of the best I've seen in the business. Myself as the program architect across the whole length of the project. We had 2 senior consultants, Gus and John, I think his name was, and then we had 1 junior as well, Zubair, helping us along the way. So we had a good mix of different skill levels, making sure we were all chipping in to achieve the right result. I think along the way we picked up a developer as well. I think William came in and solved a couple of small little issues where we needed a bit of code to resolve.
Of course.
I can see William's on the call. So yeah, look, definitely. And I think that was a strength of VISEO. Like when we needed some particular problems solved, they were able to bring in, these sort of, really capable people for sort of short bursts. And also pass the project as well. Vincent, from the AQ side, if people are interested, I guess from a project structure perspective, we had a steering committee, which really looked very much like our executive leadership team. It was our executive leadership team, plus an external providing us some program advice, and then a program manager, which prior to me was a contractor in the organisation, and then I took that role on just before the implementation of the first phase of this program and through to the end, and then it gets into BAU. We had our internal Salesforce admin that we developed through the project. I can see she's on the call as well. So she was a key part of the project team. We had a contract BA. Kevin did an excellent job, corralling AQ. We had a few other staff that sort of came in BA capabilities sort of later on in the project in the future phases as well. And then from a organisation perspective, we had what we were calling the weekly or fortnightly Salesforce managers meeting. But I guess in a project term, that was our stakeholder reference group.
Okay.
So
And did you have to backfill positions? Because I'm assuming when you're doing a large project like this one, there are always people that you need to drag in the project, but they still have a day-to-day job. How did you manage that sort of,
look,
the workload of people?
Yeah, look, that was absolutely one of the biggest constraints and one of the biggest bits of tension in our project. We needed the expertise of people that have been with the organisation for a long time and knew their services, but we also still needed them to do their day job. That project team that I mentioned, they were pretty much full-time on the project, but they were really the only ones. Everyone was working on this in addition to their day job. There certainly was some, additional middle managers sort of created during the project to provide some support. But yeah, look, it was absolutely a challenge. I wouldn't hide behind that. It's definitely something, I guess I saw early in my career in banking as well, but very much since I've been in the not-for-profit space, we do run very lean from a resource perspective. And often when you do these projects, you do put a lot of pressure on the internal team. When you add this workload on top, it took a lot of courage, but it did take a lot of persistence as well from the organisation to kind of keep going, to get through to the outcomes and kind of trusting with the benefits to be there at the end.
And so how did you actually incentivize people to see that the project outcome? Because it's obviously a large project that took, a number of years. So how did you make sure that you didn't lose the skill set and incentivize people and create a culture around the project? Do you have any thoughts around that?
I think for a lot of staff, and I would say even including myself in this, it was a great development opportunity. How often do you get to be involved, really in some cases like end to end from the start all the way through the finish of a digital transformation at this scale in an organisation that's doing as much good in the community that, has the history of AQ. So, there was this sort of nice, I guess, altruistic outcome, but also great development outcome, for a group of us, that got to learn these skills, work with new tools. I certainly hadn't been in the Salesforce ecosystem prior. And I know others hadn't been either. So I think that was part of the puzzle.
Okay, so essentially, so far what I'm hearing is a good team, great culture, opportunity for career development, a clear team structure and a clear sponsorship are the key ingredients to start, essentially. And obviously some identified problems that we all want to solve. That seems to be fairly logical.
That's much more eloquent than I've said it so far.
So the interesting thing is you've delivered that project over 3 pretty clear phases over 2.5 years. Why didn't you go through a big bang approach and do everything in 12 months?
Look, I think some of that was on advice from VISEO. Simon might want to correct me if I'm, but I'm like when certainly when I joined, we had designed 3 phases. I suspect that some of the reason for that was AQ is a lot of things, but a mature project execution organisation, it definitely was not, and so also wasn't familiar really with modern IT platforms, and probably we didn't have a lot of trust in our capability to execute or in our project delivery maturity in the organisation. So trying to go for too much before we saw an outcome, that honestly would have been too risky for the organisation. As I say, it's got a lot of courage, but it wouldn't have been able to do that, I have to be honest.
So it is a bit of a believe when you see it, right?
Look, I think that there is a lot of that. I think that's a pretty common theme I've seen in my career in IT projects. It's hard to, it's not every person that can be told about a piece of software or, and then just be able to contextualize that into the organisation they work in and just be able to understand exactly how it's going to fit in and join the dots and how it's going to start changing processes. You need to see some tangible things, to kind of build a bit of momentum, to be honest with you. I think, the other thing about the multi-phase thing, it did, unintentionally, I guess, probably controlled the amount of work, because I spoke about that, you spoke about the relatively small stakeholder group and the fact people were doing this on top of their day job. If they had to do all 3 phases worth of use cases and all 3 phases worth of testing, I think we genuinely would have probably lost some people along the way.
Yeah.
So controlling it so we didn't have to do all of that, certainly helped.
So Simon, we've got you on the phone, and obviously you were looking more from an architecture perspective. Are you able to share with us a little bit what those 3 phases were actually from a solution perspective, and how did we structure those phases to make it logical?
Yeah, definitely. So as David said, it was our recommendation that we split it out into the 3 separate phases. We do like to take the crawl, walk, run approach, as a lot of people like to refer to it. And I like to think of it as buying a bike. You go out and buy a bicycle, but you're not going to be in the Olympics day one. So first you put on your training wheels. So we started off with the basics of Salesforce. Let's get our accounts and contacts in there. Let's get some wait lists happening. And let's get users onto the system and familiar. So that's using Salesforce with the training wheels. Then we start to move on to the more advanced concepts. So things like CPQ, where you're developing complicated quotes, setting up group processes where you have quotes split across multiple users and different variable pricing and things like that. And then you're really going for the Olympics when you tie it all together, and then you put in the Salesforce billing solution, and you actually take all of those initial steps, join them all together into the final solution, and actually see how it all works when you've actually got everything put in together. Along the way, there was Scheduler who came in and did their scheduling piece as well. And that kind of helped to break up the different phases to allow us to take a bit of a pause, let Scheduler do their thing and set up the scheduling solution, and then come together and let's see how we can get billing to fit in with that scheduling solution and start issuing invoices and taking payments from customers.
So it sounds like the crawl phase was essentially establishing that CRM part, the data model for the future and these type of things. Then, as you said, let's add some bells and whistles with CPQ and covering the quoting, and then let's bring it all together with billing and field service essentially. And again, this is a really good example, I think, of the power of the Salesforce platform, and also bringing ISV partners to solve specific problems as well for specific organizations. So how do you make sure that, at the start of a project like this one, it's a project over 2.5 years, almost 3 years. How do you make sure that you architecture something on day one that will work in the long term? Because Salesforce, as we know, is releasing new version every 3 months. There's plenty of new features, new products that are being launched all the time. It's a very innovative business and solution overall. So how do you start a project and know where you're going to land, considering that the time frame is 2.5 years or 3 years?
Yeah, definitely. So I think you may have asked this question a bit earlier on, but I'll expand on my answer to that one. So with the Salesforce ecosystem, it is always important that you always keep learning. And I think that's one of the things that Salesforce reinforces along your journey, is that Salesforce is a moving platform, and you need to always be on top of the new things that are coming out. So as I said earlier, the important thing is to understand the foundational concepts of Salesforce. Those are the things that aren't going to be changing: your core components, your accounts, your contacts, your opportunities, and use those as your foundation for your future solutions. And then as you go through the project, you have to revise your solution. New requirements will come up that people aren't aware of. New technologies will evolve. New ways of working from Salesforce will come out. Especially with the automations, things like flows. The flow capabilities at the start of the project were significantly different to the flow capabilities at the end of the project. Over a 3-year period, the things you could do with an automation changed so much that you just pivot and redesign and work in an agile approach to just continuously improve and enhance on your initial design and architecture.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we're talking about, culture, team structure. We're talking about solutions, scaling for the future. There's one key aspect that we haven't really touched on yet is the change management. So we know that every large project like this one, you can have a great solution, but without proper change management, nothing's going to happen. David, on your side, I'm interested to understand, how did you approach change management? And if you had to do that project again today, what would you do differently?
Yeah, look, we probably, I did mention our stakeholder reference group there before. Look, we needed to start that earlier. That was an important part of the puzzle. I think they were engaged early on, but probably not, maybe not as far down the path to the actual doers as we should have done initially. So I think we were always doing a bit of catch up from a change management perspective, if I sort of reflect on it. There was, the sort of things you'd expect to see in a project this size. So, I mean, we had a company supporting us with training materials and training documentation. We had, this stakeholder reference group that I spoke about, but I say it probably came in a bit too late, and we needed to play a bit of catch up. So that'll be my big learning around change management, is let's try and start that earlier. Look, the things that we did have from a change management perspective, that did help and did help us see us through is, the need for change, the desire to do the change and the understanding of, the limitations they had or the challenges we had in the business that we're trying to address, that they were significant, and that did provide a lot of motivation. And so I guess what I'd say is we had a really good motivation for change, enough to get us started. Probably we could have done some more engagement in the first, sort of in the second 6 months of the project. And if we'd done that, we might not have, we might have got a slightly better outcome. But I do think, at least because of the multi-phased approach, we were able to do that better in phase 2 and phase 3. And I think all of us would agree that those were much smoother in the organisation in the first phase.
So it sounds like, if you want to summarize that, if you want to do a large project, you need to make sure that everyone understands what are the pain points that we're trying to solve, but also making sure that everyone agrees that it's the right pain point to solve. If you don't have that at the beginning, I think it's going to be quite difficult to solve the project. I think it is personally what we see organizations doing really well is a kickoff of a project where everyone agrees these are the problems, this is what we're trying to do, and this is what our organization will look like at the end of our project. If everyone agrees on that, I think it's a lot easier to take them on the journey to some extent. So that alignment seems to be quite an important part.
And the executive at AQ were, really strong through that early phases, through that early part of the program. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah,
the top-down support was really high.
And so what sort of challenges did you face during the project? So, there's always processes, alignment issues, and all these sort of things. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of those major challenges?
Yeah, well, I guess I've spoken to, I guess giving the background on this already. I mean, I've spoken about the multi-geographies that AQ works in and the multiple businesses we work in. And I suspect everyone, at least in my team at AQ, would agree that it didn't feel like we'd spent a lot of time comparing notes about ways of working, across those different geographies and across those different business units. So pretty regularly in the project, we'd run into processes that were just done differently in one of the regional sites than they were in Brisbane. And that was an interesting change management piece to overcome in its own right. We certainly would see that between business units as well, because I guess once upon a time, a school would capture its incidents differently from a therapy business would capture its incidents, and so on and so forth. And so getting some common understanding, hey, now we want one way of capturing incidents at AQ so we can report on that well across the organisation. The organisation just hadn't thought like that before. They hadn't had to, because anyone could go into Word and create the form they want and, start using it. So they did.
I have to admit, Australia is pretty special in that regard. In terms of, we do it better in these states, and our solution is always the better one. I have to admit that I did face those challenges in large organizations in the past. And it's always quite difficult to get people to admit that maybe there is a better way, or maybe that there's an in-between solution that might work better. It's certainly a challenge when you've got multiple geography. I don't think you're the only one.
Cairns is a long way from the Gold Coast, right? Cairns is a long way from Brisbane.
Yes,
and so it's very rare that staff just move between offices and take that knowledge with it. So really that business unit in Cairns, that teams in Cairns has just stood up, based on the leadership it had. And when you didn't have to think about commonality of process because you're doing everything outside of your core system anyway because you couldn't change it, you didn't think about it.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, Simon, David's been talking about obviously process alignment, the challenges between working between different geographies and locations. On your side, managing a delivery team for that project, what sort of challenges did you have, and some of the little stories that are worth sharing?
Yeah, definitely. So I think we all are familiar with the saying, the best laid plans of mice and men often go astray. And even in the most well thought out of solutions, this can often be the case. So I think with AQ, our biggest challenge was probably getting the rigid and well-structured Salesforce billing platform to actually work with the requirements of Autism Queensland and the way they run their services. We had a lot of tense meetings and a lot of back and forth until we finally got to the solution we required. So for a bit of background, Salesforce Billing is a solution that's inherently designed to work with large organizations that are selling monthly subscriptions or services, things like Netflix or your electricity bill from Origin Energy. But for AQ, we actually needed a much different use of this Salesforce Billing solution. With such requirements like group billing and on-the-spot invoicing for usage-based products, it was definitely challenging, and we had to go a bit above and beyond to find a solution that was outside of the standard model for Salesforce billing. But in the end, with a lot of investigative work and a few cases with Salesforce billing support, and we made a few small tweaks, a couple of handy automations, and we were actually able to meet those requirements within the constraints of the platform. And we ended up getting the right solution for AQ so that they could start invoicing those customers as soon as the service was finished, essentially right in the office, which was a really great outcome.
We've done our 10,000 automated invoices now, Simon. Over 10,000.
Huge.
Yeah.
That is huge. So Salesforce, if you ask them, you can't actually do on-demand invoicing with Salesforce billing. So it's a massive outcome to be able to be generating that many.
Yeah. So sometimes it's easy to say to organization, just buy the product and try to adapt your processes to the product, but it's not always practical. There's always an in-between somehow. And sometimes it comes with, some adaptation, I guess, or sometimes you call it customization or just smart configuration, I guess. So that was the major challenge on your side, Simon, is that correct?
Yeah, from a technical perspective, that was our biggest challenge. The other challenges is always process driven and aligning those processes across many different business units, as David said. So trying to find out why the Cairns people do it one way and the Gold Coast people do it another way, and what can we do to bring them together? And actually just drive a single process for them all to use. So that takes a lot of workshops, and it's just important to get the right people in the room at the right time. To really hash out what it's going to look like as a final solution that they can all agree on.
If you were talking to organizations who are thinking about starting a large transformation project like Autism Queensland, what would you tell them if you were at the pub? What would you tell them to think of?
I mean, it's pretty much the same as what I was just saying there. So you need to really align all of your processes across your organization before you even get the partner in there half the time, because if we're in there asking you how we're going to build a solution to deliver X solution and nobody can agree to it, it's definitely going to extend the timelines a little bit. Having worked at and with many large organizations, you often find that there is actually more than one process in place to achieve the same outcome. Usually that's the documented way of doing things, and then also the way that everyone actually does it. So by having those initial conversations with each of your teams, you can then start to map out how each team differs, but also how each team actually is doing the same thing, and use that as a basis to start to align the process across the teams until you do reach that final solution. I mean, it's rarely an easy process, but with the right team and the right people in the room, even the most difficult of processes can be aligned, and then we can implement that for you.
I like the idea of process alignment. It always reminds me of the onboarding of new employees, where you show them this is the corporate process that is agreed, and this is the way we do it.
Every organization I've ever been in, they're like, here's the documented way of doing it, but here are the shortcuts to get it done quicker.
That's exactly right. So that's an interesting step. So David, obviously 2.5 years of project, some pretty clear pain points identified at the beginning around process alignment and process inefficiencies. Two and a half years later, what are the outcome of that project?
Yeah, it was interesting to go digging for these, to be honest with you, Vincent, because as I said, data in the days before Salesforce was not that easy to make available. I did mention the invoices before, so that was Salesforce billings, that's individual invoices. Look, I haven't quantified it, but I can easily believe it's a 5-minute saving per invoice, and that's going to add up to a lot of hours. We've probably
That's
seen
50,000 minutes saved already.
Look, we've probably done another 1,000 invoices since I got that number from Megan a few weeks ago. So it's probably higher than that. There's been a flow-on effect into admin, right? I mean, we've had, we've got less staff working in the therapy admin team than we had previously. Some of that's been a little bit of attrition. Some of that's been relocation into schools, which obviously I've spoken about growing. So, we've gone from about 12 FTE in therapy admin roles down to about 8.5 FTE. Interestingly, we've seen an increase in utilisation. Again, data was quite hard to get before, but even looking at the spreadsheets and where we're capturing that manually, generally across the therapy team, we were sort of hitting a therapist utilisation. This is sort of billable hours per therapist, for therapist time. We were doing about 40% of their time was actually billable. That's now up at 62%. Mm-hmm. That's really come from visibility, transparency, redesign of process. So, therapy admin team are taking on that scheduling role, as previously it was done by a manager. Sorry, the intercom beside me, the Gold Coast going up, and I don't know how to deal with it. Hopefully you can't hear it too badly. Probably the last one I think was interesting is actually in cancellation rates. I was just looking at this one the other day because we're wondering if cancellations were a challenge in the organisation. Cancellations are quite a lot lower than they were prior to Salesforce, so down by about 10%. That probably, it's discipline in booking, I suspect. It's probably also some of the automations we've got around job reminders and such. So there's a couple of ones off the top of my head. There's been a lot of other things that are much harder to quantify, if I'm honest. Yeah. We know we've been successful onboarding new programs, and I spoke about the challenges around creating new workflows. I've seen now multiple cases where we've onboarded, large new programs, cloning off in essence some of the functionality that was put there by the VISEO team in the original project and repurposing that or changing flows or changing forms to support new programs, which, in the end was probably the number one pain point I wanted to address when I joined AQ, that we could actually make changes to the system.
Yeah, okay. So
I think,
talk,
if I may,
yes, sorry, Simon, go ahead.
On top of that, there's also the customer experience improvements that we've been able to make as well and save time, not just for AQ, but for also their customers. And I think the one that I'm most proud of that we implemented was the student onboarding process. So every semester, the parent of a child was sent this 20-page Word document, and this 20-page Word document was completely blank. So no name, no details, none of their existing information that AQ may or may not have known about them. And they had to sit there and they had to fill it out, pen and paper, print it, sign it, scan it, or fax it back into AQ. And that would have taken half an hour to an hour, if not more, for a parent to fill out every semester. And we were actually able to transition that to a Salesforce process that was actually built into an Experience Cloud solution. And what that did was it meant that the parent just clicked a link, went to a website, logged in with their details, so all the information was secure, of course, and then it actually pre-populated all the information about the child and the services they were enrolling in. And that would have literally turned it from an hour and a half process down to a quick 15 minutes, check that all the information that you already have about me is still correct. Maybe make a few updates if you have to, and you're done. So the amount of hours we've saved for each of those customers would be phenomenal.
Yeah, I just saw a comment saying, I think as a parent, This is a major saving here. And so it's not just about, what we deliver internally, but you're right, like bringing it back to the customer experience and the fact that those people don't have to spend an hour and a half filling a form. It is a massive benefit. And at the end of the day, each organization is here to deliver better experience for customers. We should never forget that.
Similar down the end. I mean, paying invoices online, getting invoices the day after, the evening after, service delivery automated. That's a big improvement as well, because obviously those are being manually generated. So those were getting sent out when people had time to send them out. So yeah, look, you wouldn't want to underestimate the value from the service enrollment portal and how well that's used. There's a lot of inconsistency in process there too. Some teams did it 6 monthly, some teams did it annually, some teams did it on commencement of every new service. So yeah, that was a good one to pick up, Simon, because yeah, that did have all the hallmarks of some of the challenges we've spoken about today.
The reality is it's quite interesting when companies or organizations go through a major transformation like this one. You build a business case around benefits that you probably want to try to achieve to make sure the business case stacks up to some extent and that the CFO is comfortable with the return on investment. But there's a number of non-tangible benefits that you're getting in the organization, whether it is an impact on the culture, the impact on your customers, the impact on your employees as well. They're difficult to measure, but they do have a significant impact. And it's not necessarily a dollar that you can put on it, but that might be around, reducing the attrition, losing employees. It might be, as you said, the cancellation rate. That's a very tangible benefit, but not necessarily something that you chase on day one. It's just something that happens as a side effect, right? So I think it's quite an interesting story that, that you will get more benefits that you were not expecting, essentially.
Yeah, even so, when I spoke about the challenges we had accessing remotely and staff that were mobile first or mobile only, those, with things we probably had in the business case, we wanted to achieve, but seeing them in the real world is very different. When you don't have paper forms for incidents, you don't have paper notes and notebooks of what's happened in a particular home on a given day, and now that's all in the system and actually reportable. The scale of impact is definitely higher than we would have thought about.
Okay, we're getting to the end of the 45 minutes of discussions. There are a few questions in the Q&A section. Please, if you've got questions, please drop them here, and we'll get Simon and David to answer them. I'll just jump to the first question. Obviously, large transformational projects like these get great results, but it can be exhausting and tiring. How do you, as an organization, keep the momentum to go to the next phase and not just stop where you are? That's probably for you, David, this one.
Yeah. Sorry, there's a little bit of movement behind me, but I'll keep worrying out in a second. It was tiring. I think the multiple phases helped. Being able to see some benefits being achieved did give the motivation to kind of keep going. I think also accepting you're having a pretty tight scope. I mean, certainly soon after we started, we had a very clear view on what we were going to say was the end of the digital transformation program. And it's not like the day we finished the digital transformation program, everything was perfect and we never changed the system again. We just had a way to get out of that program into a continuous improvement, ongoing improvement, BAU model that could take a bit of the pressure off the organisation to keep running at kind of project speed. So yeah, look, hopefully that's answered. I think getting some benefits from a phase does help you give the momentum to get to the next phase, and probably maybe we were either fortuitous or intentional. I don't know. Simon might know. That second phase was a really big customer impacting phase, and the organisation in the end does exist for our clients and exists for the cause, and being able to go out of that first phase, which was really hard and big with all of the data migration and all of the brand new systems and all the stressing of that, into something that you could see a really tangible impact for our clients. That was probably lucky.
Yeah, no, you're right, David. And we do try to plan things out that way. Is phase one is the foundational items, and a lot of organizations find that that's the boring part. We get you off your old platform, we get you onto Salesforce, but you're still doing things pretty much the same way on a new platform. But then you get to that second phase, and that's where you really hit the pedal to the metal and start seeing all of those massive improvements, where we can start layering things on top of that foundation to actually start seeing massive improvements, not just for your internal stuff, but also your customers and clients as well.
Thank you. So we've got a next question. What were the benefits for implementing CPQ? So just for the audience, Salesforce CPQ is a quoting tool, essentially configure price quote. It can have a billing or revenue recognition module as well. But essentially, it is a module to be able to quote accurately. So I guess the question is probably more for you, David, as a starting point. What were the benefits of implementing that solution?
Well, I guess the key thing, what CPQ does in our business is we create quotes, which in the US world often get called service agreements. Those contracts get executed. That creates the products in our system for us to do our jobs against and then bill from. So I have to be honest that Simon will have to tell me exactly, what of that we couldn't do without CPQ. But I guess from our customer onboarding journey, obviously from that initial inquiry, being able to quote and give our clients and potential clients the information they need so they can go back to their NDIS plan manager or the NDIA themselves and the planner, with the information in a consistent format. So then we can bring that in and turn that into work and we can actually do to help people. That's pretty important from our customer life cycle.
Yeah, so what we found when we first started this program of work is not unlike what we find at most companies when we go to do a CPQ implementation, and that's pricing is literally the Wild West of the company. So multiple disparate Excel spreadsheets that people were keeping in their local file store was how they priced their services. So Cairns had their Excel file and Gold Coast had their Excel file. And they were all trying to manually update it based on the NDIA pushing out NDIS price changes. So, you could get a quote from Cairns for a service and a quote from Gold Coast for the exact same service, and they'd be a different price. And then you would then go and receive the service, and then somebody would send an email off to finance, and finance would look at their spreadsheet, and then finance would then bill the customer a different price occasionally. So what CPQ does is it puts rigidity and structure and process around the pricing. So the price that you get in Cairns is the price that you get on the Gold Coast, is the price that you get on the invoice. And from what I understand, adding that structure into the platform now means that when you send that invoice to the NDIA for payment, it's no longer getting rejected. I'm not sure what the percentage was. It was still quite low, but from what I understand, it's almost completely eliminated the rework from having rejected invoices because it didn't match what the quote was up front.
Okay, thank you. We've got another question. At what point did the broader organization start to see the light from the effort they've gone through on the transformation? Was there like a aha moment? So David, you want to answer that one?
Look, potentially when we asked them to start doing some testing, look, there's no doubt when, after a reasonably stressful weekend of data migration, when staff could start logging in and seeing, their clients in the new system, and they could do that on their phone, and, they could, see the family members that were linked to that, and they could see, how notes could start going. There's no doubt when they started getting in there for the first time, apart from being a really unfamiliar IT system, very different from what they had, and a different account structure from what we were used to. But there's no doubt that was a big moment for AQ. People liked seeing their clients that they are working with in the system. That was probably a big part of it. Certainly, interestingly, the one Simon referenced before, the service enrolment portal, you really saw the benefit of that the second time you had to do one, because the first time you had to learn how to use the new portal, you had to learn how the logins worked, you still had to enter all of the data. It was the second time it was great, and we had really good feedback from it. Yeah, I'd say those are a couple of the big ones.
Okay, so we've got one last question, or time for one last question. Maybe a question for you, Simon. What would you advise to smaller NFP organizations that are looking at Salesforce?
Yeah, definitely. So just because you're not a massive organization doesn't mean that Salesforce won't have the benefits for you. Salesforce provides a range of products and services to meet the needs of organizations of all sizes and all shapes. And it's important to understand that you can start with the basics. Even a small Salesforce implementation can give you marked improvements by making the information about your clients visible, accessible, reportable, and traceable so that everyone in your organization can see it. And that's just using the out-of-the-box standard Salesforce functionality without the fancy bells and whistles like service enrollment portals or CPQ. You don't need to have the fancy stuff to see benefits from Salesforce. So starting off with a small foundational implementation, you'll generally always see some kind of success in terms of improvements of metrics across your organization.
Look, thank you so much for your participation. The journey doesn't stop here. I'll just share a quick slide. We do have quite a lot of materials available, and most recently we have released a white paper around digital transformation for customer service featuring David specifically from Autism Queensland. There's a lot of information in there, so don't hesitate to download and use your phone to scan the QR code. Thank you again, David and Simon, for your participation and all your insights and valuable inputs. We really appreciate it. The recording for that session will be available a little bit later, and we will send it as well as a summary of that discussion and the key points that have been raised today. Again, thank you so much on behalf of VISEO, and for everyone. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Vincent. Good to see you, Simon.
Good to see you.